you for joining us today. My name is Simone Knego, and I am thrilled to be part of today's workshop. I am a wife, a recently published author, and a mom to 6 amazing kids, 3 of whom we adopted. Our family is Black, white, Asian, and Jewish. We are Federation. There are nearly 8 billion people in this world, and each one of us is different. We have different beliefs, different characteristics, different hopes and dreams, different jobs, different houses, and different families. We are extremely diverse, and that is a really good thing. Diversity is our world. We might often think of diversity as color or maybe even religion, but it's more than just that. It means people. It's the ability to understand that people are going to be different than you and to respect them for that. Whether it's someone who thinks differently than you, someone from a different culture or a different religious background, someone who has a unique story, or someone who speaks a different language. It's all part of diversity. When discussing diversity with my daughter, she said it best. The diversity is the ability for anyone to express who they are without being judged. It really is that simple. I believe the problem that the world has in general is that we judge people before we even know them. We make assumptions about people based on the first thing we see, which has very little to do with what actually is. I am not a Black mother and can never begin to say that I understand what Black mothers go through when raising their kids. But I am a mother of Black children. I am and forever will be disheartened that my children have been and will be treated differently because of the color of their skin. I've had to have conversations with my son, Ari, that I never had to have with my oldest son, Jacob. Keep your hands on the steering wheel if you're ever pulled over by a police officer. Don't walk around the neighborhood by yourself at night. Don't put your hoodie up unless we're around. It's horrible, it's disheartening, and it's not okay. Ari got his boating license last summer. The first day Ari took the jet ski out by himself, he got pulled over. When I asked him why, he said, "Because I'm Black." Look around, Mom. How many Black people do you see on a jet ski in Sarasota? He said the officer not only asked to see his boating license and his ID, but insisted that Ari point out the house that he lived in. The police officer wrote him a warning for going too fast in a no-wake zone. It wasn't a no-wake zone. It's heartbreaking that Ari has to do things differently than his white brother because we live in a world where people make false assumptions based on what others look like and then immediately act on those assumptions. What the world needs is fairness and equality for all. People need to understand that every individual is integral to the fabric of society. In this day and age, anger needs to become unity. Destruction needs to become bridge building. And most importantly, we must move forward with love and understanding. Maya Angelou said, "We all should know that diversity makes for rich tapestry, and we must understand that all of the threads of the tapestry are equal in value, no matter what their color." For me, it goes even beyond that, though. We're equal in value, no matter our color, our shape, our size, our beliefs, our family, and the list goes on and on. We all matter, and we all have the capacity for kindness and respect. When we talk about making a difference in the world, embracing diversity and seeing everyone as uniquely beautiful and completely valued is one of the greatest differences we can make. I see our world as diverse, and it's the acceptance of that diversity that's so important to me. It's not about pointing out how we're different. It's about realizing that despite our differences, our value is always the same. We are here today to focus on racial justice. Recent events have brought us to a new level of consciousness regarding the penetrable fear that exists for Black men and women as they attempt to live out their daily lives. We must have an open discussion about how we, as a Jewish community, address these racial injustices in our local communities. We need to make sure that we understand the complexities that surround racial justice and inclusion. We need to make sure that when we walk into a room, we have an open mind and we choose to look at all of the people in that room with dignity and respect, because no human being deserves less. And we can't just assume the world will be okay because we feel okay about the world. As Elie Wiesel said, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. The opposite of art is not ugliness, it's indifference. The opposite of faith is not heresy, it's indifference. And the opposite of life is not death, it's indifference. A different world cannot be built by indifferent people. We are Federation, and we must not stand idly by waiting for the world to change. Thank you.
Amen to that. Thank you, Simone, for sharing your wisdom, your lived experience, and your intention with us as we begin today's program. As Simone just shared, we are Federation, and we must not stand idly by waiting for the world to change, and we won't. In an op-ed after the murder of George Floyd, titled "On Racial Justice, We Can Do Better," CEO and President of JFNA, Eric Fingerhut, and Chair of the Board of Trustees, Mark Wilf of JFNA, said that the success of Federation's mission has always depended on the strength of civil societies in which we live. That is why we must address with urgency the real and legitimate concerns raised by communities of color and Jews of color about discrimination. As a mixed race Jew from Muncie, New York, I don't know if you can see this picture, as a millennial traditionalist, my theory of change is really working within our communities to support and leverage what we have as our legacy. So friends, let's be reminded, this work does not happen in a vacuum. In a world with increasing complexity and vulnerable populations with deep need, our leadership, our values, our resolve to stand for a civil society that is righteous and just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive is what this generation needs. And it is what this discussion today is all about. It is why I'm so excited to join together with leaders who have grappled with many challenges of intergroup relations and considering how to activate the Jewish community and finding sustainable pathways to the ongoing work around racial justice. So I'd like to welcome our panelists to join us on stage. We will first hear from Maharat Rori Picker Neiss, director of the JCRC and founder of the JCRE in St. Louis. Afterward, we'll hear from April Baskin, CEO and founder of Joyous Justice. For our third presentation, we'll hear from David Heller, who is the board chair of the Cleveland Federation, as well as Margaret Mitchell, CEO of the YWCA in Cleveland. And finally, Acharon Chaviv, the last but not least, Nate Looney. We'll hear from Nate Looney, who is the manager of racial justice initiatives at Avodah. We thank you again, each of you, for taking the time to join us today and look forward to having a discussion after our panelists. With that, I pass the mic to Maharat Rori. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Isaiah. Thank you, Simone. And thank you to all of you for joining us. I am honored and humbled to follow those passionate teachings and to share with you a bit about our work in St. Louis. So let me tell you some of what we're doing. Early this year, our JCRC started what we call the Jewish Coalition for Racial Equity, or the JCRE for short. Our JCRE is modeled similar to our JCRC Council, in that every Jewish organization and synagogue in St. Louis was invited to send a representative to the JCRE. And we also have passionate individuals who have joined as at-large members. The representation piece was important for us for a number of reasons. First and foremost, because we believe that the more voices we have in the conversation, the more effective we can be in our work, and the more we can hear from the variety of perspectives that exist within our community. We also recognize that racial equity work is not the responsibility of any one organization, and that it needs to be an investment from all of our organizations. And we wanted to ensure a clear pathway where our Jewish institutions could be plugged in. And also, we wanted to be plugged into the work happening at other agencies. We wanted to make sure that we could convene a space where groups could share, let everyone know if they planned a certain program or speaker, and open up opportunities for collaboration. When we started the JCRE, we established it with two core beliefs. The first is that our work on racial justice must follow the lead of the communities directly affected, including seeking leadership and guidance from Jewish people of color. We were not going to reinvent the wheel here. We have numerous agencies nationally and locally deeply involved in this work. And the work of our Jewish community should not be to compete, but should benefit from and amplify the work that was already taking place. And second, that no one can be an effective ally in the fight for racial justice without examining and processing our own histories and actions around racism and inclusion. To that end, our JCRE established 3 subcommittees. The first is policy and advocacy. The second is strengthening relationships with communities of color. And the third is programming. And I'm going to give you just a brief overview of what each of these committees do, and then a couple of examples just to drive the points home. The Policy and Advocacy Subcommittee was established to assist our JCRC in evaluating policy issues related to racial equity and determine where our time and voices can be most effective. This group would also engage in legislative advocacy at the state and federal level on selected issues, and assist in drafting and submitting op-eds and letters to the editor on issues that we care about. This is a crucial piece because our work on racial equity can't only be an understanding and an education if it didn't also lead to action, where we identified key policy areas of racial inequity in our region. Our second subcommittee, the Strengthening Relationships with Communities of Color, was established to act as liaisons for the Jewish community within Black-led organizations on the front lines, and to have individuals attend meetings and events of these organizations to ensure a Jewish presence, to listen, to learn, and to report back to our broader community. Most simply, this committee is focused on ensuring that our Jewish community has relationships with key organizations and community leaders working on racial equity, so we know where to take guidance and what major issues are arising in our region. And finally, the Programming Committee, which we also call Engaging the Jewish Community Subcommittee, was established to assist in developing a strategic timeline for programs and events and brainstorm the most impactful ways to engage the Jewish community internally, both through education and with action. The Programming Committee in particular works in coordination with our synagogues and organizations. We want to make sure that this is a community effort, both lifting up the work within the synagogues and adding to that work from a community-wide approach. I want to highlight just 2 examples of initiatives that have grown out of this work. From our Policy and Advocacy Subcommittee, we identified voting rights and voter suppression as key factors in racial inequity within our region. And to that end, we have been actively supporting early and mail-in voting options, including a campaign with rabbis across the state saying that staying home and staying safe qualifies as a religious imperative, because Missouri does not have no excuse absentee voting. And while the pandemic did not qualify one to vote absentee during our primary, religious belief is a valid excuse for voting absentee in our state. And when Missouri did ultimately change the regulations to allow for no excuse absentee voting for this election, but required a notarized ballot to do so, we partnered with libraries across our region to offer notary services for people who did not feel comfortable going to the polls in accessible and known locations. And from our Programming Subcommittee, We are in the midst now of a virtual Jewish conference on racial equity to understand the Jewish community's relationship to race, racism, and bias, historically and in the present day. The conference includes a keynote session and then 4 sessions, each 1 week apart. So last Sunday was the launch with the keynote, and yesterday was part 1. Our consultant worked to create a program booklet that includes guiding questions for each session and self-reflection, and participants will be paired with a chavruta, a learning partner, to discuss and process the materials being shared. The conference is meant to be a launching off point for more extensive programs in 2021. These are just some of the examples of what has emerged for us, and I'm happy to talk in more detail with anyone who's interested in diving deeper. But I want to emphasize the guiding principles that drive us. First, the need to bring together the wide range of our Jewish community. Second, the need to be led by those most impacted. And third, the recognition that no work will be effective if we don't include work on ourselves. As Simone and Rabbi Isaiah so beautifully said in laying the foundation for this conversation, racial justice is a Jewish issue because it impacts our Jewish community. And so we need our entire Jewish community in this fight for racial equity. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Maharat Rori, for sharing those beautiful remarks with us and for giving us a sense of your work. I would now like to pass the mic over to April Baskin, CEO and founder of Joyous Justice, and so many other incredible projects, to share about her work in a presentation.
Hi, it's so great to be here with all of you. Rabbi Rothstein, Rabbi Isaiah, I so appreciate your warm welcome. So hi, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here in this conversation with all of you. As Rabbi Isaiah warmly shared, I run an effort called Joyous Justice, and I also work part-time as the Racial Justice Director for the Jewish Social Justice Roundtable. So I wanted to share a little bit of context. If you had an animal as your racial justice avatar, based upon how you're feeling or the kind of work you do, what kind of animal is your racial justice avatar, either of what you're doing now or how you would like to be? Also, I like all their googly eyes. I just invite you to think about if your social justice leadership and work were an animal, what would it be and why? I also like this because from the vantage of my Native American perspective or emergent strategy, as we move to have a more integrated social justice approach, it's helped to get insight from the natural world just to keep us fresh and engaged. The minority is the majority of Jewish life now. When we take all these different numbers, that over half of our community is intermarried, and 70% of non-Orthodox marriages since 2000 have been interfaith, and 20% of our community has a physical, mental, or intellectual disability. 13 to 15% of our community are Jews of color, and estimates range anywhere from 10 to 20% of our community have Mizrahi or Sephardi heritage. At least 7% of our community is LGBTQ+. And interestingly, with both LGBTQ and Jews of color, we see that with our younger generations, those numbers skew even higher. And in the context of when we think of our avatar of who we're engaging in terms of our community, well over half of our community isn't currently engaged. And why this conversation is so exciting, I'm not trying to be a downer, but to say what this says in the context of what Rabbi Isaiah said is that this is a fertile ground of immense opportunity for us to begin to really get this right and be a meaningful resource for many in our community. And we both have a long way to go, but I can tell you, having been in this for 18 years, when we get it right, it is so meaningful and empowering for those we are serving. I also want to move in explain that as we're moving into becoming more diverse, it's critically important. There's some debate about this, but several studies, including this one from 2000, that's cited in a number of scholarly journals and sources, demonstrates that there's often a debate of whether diversity in a group is a strength or a weakness. And what we find is that it depends on the training and the level of intercultural competence or the ability to work effectively across lines of difference. And when we don't have that ability, our organizations tend to underperform. And when we do have that ability to work effectively across lines of difference around not only race, but gender and other issues, we see institutions begin to shine and outperform otherwise homogenous institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, April. Just for the record, by the way, my racial justice animal would be a friendly dragon. I don't know about you, friends. Thank you for all the work that you do, April. Nice. You have done for me, for the field of Jews of color as a whole, for the Jewish community, and beyond that. And as we continue forward, I would now like to introduce Margaret Mitchell, who is CEO of YWCA of Cleveland, and David Heller, board chair of Cleveland Federation, to share about their work. Thank you.
Rabbi Isaiah, thank you so much. And Margaret and I are thrilled to be here today to tell a little story about what we've been doing in Cleveland. So as summer approached and all of us were horrified by what was going on in the country and the events of George Floyd and others in the country, we felt in Cleveland that we needed to act, and we needed to act quickly. And so my partner in this, Erica Rudin-Luria, who is the exec in Cleveland, and I had a conversation, and we wanted to move very quickly after the incidents occurred. And who did we call? We called on Margaret Mitchell. Margaret is the executive director of the YWCA. Margaret is someone that has been working in this racial equity and inclusion work in Cleveland. She's someone that had a program already up and running in Cleveland, which you're going to hear about, which is the 21-day challenge. And so what we did was we invited Margaret to come speak to our board and to educate our board. And one of the things that Erica and I were concerned with was we were concerned about just preaching to the converted, as I call it, people that were already predisposed to understanding racial equity and inclusion work, and trying to bring along those that might be resistant to it, people that weren't open-minded to what was going on in our country and needed a little bit of a push to be brought along. And so I'm going to turn it over to Margaret now, who is going to share with you a little bit about what we did in Cleveland and the 21-day challenge that was curated for the Jewish community. Margaret?
Thank you, David. And it is absolutely a delight to be here this afternoon with all of you. It is a process and a journey. You've heard that from Rory as well as April. And several years ago, in fact, 4 years ago at the YWCA, even though our mission, which is proudly displayed on our building, said that our mission is focused on eliminating racism and empowering women, we were not doing any substantive work in the space of eliminating racism. And so 4 years ago, we really began pushing that boulder up the hill. And 2 years ago, we identified the 21-day racial justice and 21-day racial equity and social justice challenge. It is based on a book by Debbie Irving, who is the author of Waking Up White. And we saw this as an opportunity for our own internal growth. And so in 2019, we released the first 21-day challenge. And we did it almost as an afterthought to the general community. But the entire intent for us in 2019 was to use the challenge as a development tool for our staff. And at the end, we decided to open it up to the community. And we were surprised when thousands of people joined us. And again, when we released our second challenge in 2020, more people joined us on this 21-day journey. When David and Erica called me, it was exciting because I see the partnership between the Black community and the Federation as a very powerful one. And this challenge is really anti-oppression work. And this is what is so important for us to be able to do together. It is absolutely vital if we are to arrive at the place where the color of our skin doesn't matter, but it is the content of our character. And in order to break down policies and practices and norms and make real change, we have to be able to identify oppression and racism when we see it. And so the 21-day challenge is a behavioral tool. It is at the heart a very, very simple tool that can be used with other racial justice initiatives, other diversity and inclusion initiatives. It can stand alone, but it partners beautifully with all of the work that you're going to be doing in the upcoming year. The challenge does last 21 days, and each day during the 21 days, you'll receive an email, and that email will have typically 3 items, no more than 5, and each item is different. It can be an article, a podcast, a infographic, but some information for you to be able to digest. And when David and Erica called and we had a conversation about the 21-day challenge, we knew that this could be a tool that the Federation in Cleveland could use. And so we curated a challenge specifically for the Jewish Federation. This challenge is built through a Jewish lens, and it looks at anti-oppression and anti-racism and social justice, but through a strong understanding of growth and behavioral change linked and rooted in Jewishness. And so it isn't the challenge that you might have done previously in the community. And we are excited to be able to curate a 2021 challenge that will focus on the Jewish community. Thank you, Rabbi Isaiah, for having me, and also Simone for sharing her mother's heart earlier was beautiful as well.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, David. Friends, as we hear from our panelists, we remember that there's so much in this current field that is going on. So many people we can reach out to, and the example of the 21-day Racial Equity Challenge coming from the Cleveland Federation and in partnership with Margaret and YWCA, I think we just remember that sometimes it just takes reaching out. We could be a resource to each other. And with that, friends, I would now like to introduce my friend and colleague, Nate Looney, Manager of Racial Justice Initiatives at Avodah, to share about his work. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank you, Rabbi Isaiah. And I have to chip in on the racial justice avatar game. And I think mine would be some sort of a falcon if I were to be an avatar. Thank you for giving me some time and your attention. So in 2018, my mother passed away after a very short battle with cancer. As a more observant leaning Jew, I had a responsibility to recite Kaddish for her for every day for a year. I had just finished sitting Shiva and chose to go to catch the daily minyan at the shul I'd been attending for the past few years. It was mincha, afternoon service, so the crowd was a little bit thin. And by the time davening was supposed to start, we were at 10 men, including me. But davening didn't start. The Shaliach Sabor, person leading davening, went outside to pull someone in off the street to make minyan. So there could only be one reason for the renewed urgency to make minyan, me. I knew what was happening while it was happening. Even though in my mind I was a part of the community, in the community's eyes, as a Black man, I was an outsider, not a part of the us, but a part of the them. Althea Bernstein is a multiracial, multi-faith Jewish woman of color that was attacked this summer by a group of white supremacists. They threw an accelerant in her face as she sat at a stoplight in her car. The perpetrators in that moment only saw her Blackness. While Althea has healed from her physical wounds, one can only guess the psychological implications. Earlier this month, the case was closed. Investigators could not prove that the attack happened or if it was even racially motivated. This makes me think about the alarming number of Black people found this summer hanging from trees, all listed as suicide. How many of you out there have biracial or multi-faith family members? When we as Jews look at the current racial climate, it cannot be an us versus them. The us has to include them. The intersectionality and diversity of our collective Jewish experience is what makes us stronger. Our Jewish community is rapidly evolving, and we cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. The damages caused by othering and lack of inclusion of Jews of color, JOCs, in the fabric of our community is significant. I can say for myself, my tefillah has never been the same since that one afternoon I wasn't counted in Minyan. It hurts to think about how many JOCs face similar experiences and choose to just walk away from the Jewish community altogether. This is us. This requires an honest and awful painful look at our organizations, our communities, to understand why JOCs are not present in mass, even though the data proves that we exist. Even at Avodah, a 20-year-old Jewish organization dedicated to training young Jewish social justice leaders, we found that we were talking about our commitment to racial justice when we first started as an approach of us versus them. The question was, how can we help them? How can we show up for the racial justice movement? 4 years ago, we entered more deeply into a racial justice journey, and upon reaching out to Jewish leaders of color and consultants, we were advised to work on us first. We were told we needed to get our own house in order before we looked beyond. The outcome was understanding that the us needed to represent inclusion. JOCs could no longer be the them. Avodah created a racial justice task force made up of a diversity of voices and represented different levels of leadership. One of the recommendations from that task force was the creation of my position, a role focused on prioritizing the racial justice lens in all of our work, including and especially our recruitment of new participants. We also realized that we couldn't just bring new participants into our existing programs. We needed to transform the programs and structures in our work to support Jews of color who are entering our doors. This meant for us doing a full audit of all of our work to identify what needed to be changed. And honestly, we found plenty, including changing our curriculum to have to include more diverse voices, beyond just the Ashkenazi lens, to investing in board and staff training and looking at the diversity of our team and board leadership. This summer, as our nation and Jewish community faced a deep reckoning with structural racism, we thought deeply about how we could support Jews of color in our community. We hosted programming around personal ecology, self-care, specifically for the JOCs in the Avodah broader network. This was based on my own experience. What I needed then and what I need now is for white-led organizations to understand that this work is not easy for JOC leaders on a good day. In moments of chaos, the demands and pressures increases exponentially. This squeezing out space for sleep, nourishment, and time to process the individual experience. At that moment at Avodah, our job was to leverage our resources and support JOC leaders that were in the trenches. And that work needs to continue. And we're not in this alone. We're proud to be a part of and have deep relationships with a field of organizations working to support JOCs, many of them led by Jews of color. This has been deep, hard work, and it hasn't been easy, nor has it gone in a straight line. Mistakes have been made. We strive to have diversity representation in our programs match that of the Jews of Color Initiative report counting inconsistencies. According to the report that analyzed the inconsistencies in race-related data collection within the Jewish community, around 15% of American Jews are Jews of color. At Avodah, we're getting closer, but we're not there yet. And we're committed to being transparent about where we are. So this year we launched interactive racial justice guide to help organizations navigate beginning their racial justice journey. This guide gives step-by-step help for an organization looking to dive into this work, and it is downloadable and available on our website. I invite you to view the guide and check out the other resources on our website, including several videos and discussion guides to start conversations with your community about how you can deepen your racial work. We will soon be rolling out more offerings to support justice journeys of Jewish organizations, and we can't wait, I can't wait to be in conversation with you as we do. Now, I want to offer some concrete steps that will hopefully help you as you dive into and strengthen your racial justice work that you're doing. First, education is a crucial and ongoing first step. We know this as Jews, that education is crucial. It is counterproductive to hire a JOC to your organization without doing the internal work of getting your house in order first. This means investing in staff and board training, reading books and articles, thinking through the organizational barriers that might exist before bringing on more JOCs to your board and staff. The second one is invest in JOC leadership. In leadership development and spaces for JOCs to be in community with each other. I want to highlight how important this is. How many JOCs do you see leading our organizations, chairing our boards? And I want to stress how important JOC-only spaces can be for the development of JOC leaders. Part of the development of JOC leadership requires safe spaces for us to grow into our leadership capacities. We need time to be together without having to code switch. We need time to take a breath, and we need safe space to be our full selves. Our Jewish community needs to invest in JOC-only spaces. And at Avodah, this is what we're doing by creating a JOC bite for our service corps next year. We need more great leadership in the Jewish community, hands down. The third one is not about us without us. Let me repeat that. Not about us without us. Let JOCs speak for ourselves. Ask JOCs in your network what they need as opposed to creating solutions that nobody asked for. Hire JOC consultants. We've been doing this work for decades. Understand that this work requires a line item in your budget. Do not expect JOCs to put in hours of mental and emotional labor for free. And I know I'm running short on time, but the fourth one is mistakes are a part of the process. Understand that you will make mistakes. And it's not enough to desist from the work. And in closing, I just want to say that I can only speak for myself that this work is deeply personal. I can say that I've shed many tears over the significance of the burden of doing this work. My passion is to build an inclusive Jewish community, one where no JOC feels othered when walking into a Jewish space, one where the voices of Jews of color are listened to, lifted up, and not discounted. Let us use this moment to move forward as a cohesive unit into launching this new era. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nate. Friends, as we come together, we just heard such incredible presentations of the journeys, the many different journeys that each of us bring with us as we approach this work of racial justice in our generation. And we know that it's complex and it's multi-layered. And as Nate just shared, it's from the heart, it's personal, and it's driven by this idea that we know that is so much rooted in the Jewish tradition. This idea of Abraham's tent, Abraham and Sarah, where the tent had openings on each side. This idea where we went out into the world and saw what people needed. Maharat Rori, one of the things that I'm curious about as a Maharat, as a spiritual leader, as a member of the cloth, what role do you see as Judaism, the Jewish tradition, playing, and how do you bring that to the work that you do?
I'm so deeply grateful for that question, and I struggle with that question in certain ways, partially just because I find it so obvious that I actually have trouble piecing it out sometimes, right? Like I have learned so much, and I'm so grateful to all of the other panelists who I think spoke so eloquently, and April and Nate, who for sharing some of your personal stories on this journey, right? This idea of like that our Jewish identity and the racial inequity that exists within this country are not separate stories, right? These are stories that are deeply intertwined. They're deeply intertwined in part because there are people for whom these are their lived experiences, and those are key people who are part of our Jewish community. And they are deeply intertwined because I think so much of our Jewish story is a story of inequity, of what it has meant to live as a minority community in so many different places. And so much of our American story has been a story of the ways in which societal structures and civil liberties have enabled the Jewish community to become safe in a way that we really have not experienced in any other country in recent history. When I say recent history, I mean like 2,000 years, and we can sort of even argue before that. So for me, I don't really see how we can separate those out. And I think that it's important that as we enter into these spaces, it's not about just telling our stories of, I think we all kind of love those images, right, of Heschel March with King, or we want to tell over these stories of what it's meant for the Jewish community to be involved in the civil rights movement. But in doing that, I think what we're not telling is that the civil rights movement is a Jewish movement, right? That all of these movements, I believe firmly, are Jewish movements. And I think that it's our role as clergy to help people find the religious language for that. And I think that's part of the beauty of what we bring as a Jewish community into this space, is that we get to add this tradition and this heritage and this richness to what is already an incredibly rich conversation, to grow it and to enhance it into new and expansive ways.
Thank you for that. And so Nate, I'll pass it to you in just a moment. I was going to ask, as a follow-up question to this, on the note of race relations, sometimes people would say around racial justice, there's sometimes this idea that Black-Jewish relations is a dichotomy, right? It's with black folks and white Jewish folks. And I don't know if that's how everyone identifies as white and Jewish. But with that being said, we know that there's a unique lens and frame. And Simone, I know that this is so much of what you brought in some of your introductory remarks is that there are intersections, there are multiple realities. It's gray, it's not black and white. And in fact, race we know doesn't really exist. And yet we have the real implications of how racism plays out in society. So Nate, what role would you say that Jews of color play in this conversation around racial justice? And as you were sharing so passionately earlier about recognizing the real reality of Jews of color, of people of color, and also being a Jewish professional, working within the Jewish community to make sure that we are bringing this to life in the broader civil society. What voice do you think Jews of color should be playing? And from there, I'll pass it to my friend and colleague, Simone, who will ask just a few more questions to our panelists.
These are really interesting questions. And I think that the most important thing to think about when we're talking about Jewish and race relations, even though like this is just a construct that we're working from or a framework, is to keep in mind Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw's work around intersectionality. It is important to recognize that at any given time, any of us are holding multiple identities, and those multiple identities interplay with each other given the circumstances that that individual is in at any moment. So I say all that to say it's important to recognize that the Jewish community isn't one single experience. And JOCs in this moment, while we shouldn't have to carry this burden, the burden that we have is creating the bridge for the Jewish population as a whole to understand that the community is more dynamic than just one lens. I think that we have an obligation, those of us that choose to step up into this work, because as I said before, it isn't easy work. Those of us that choose to step into this work, it's important for us to take folks to task and sort of push people a little bit on their comfort zones, because that's where real growth and development happens. And understanding that at the same time, the JOC community is evolving and growing. So there is the side of it where it's like come into your own community and also take the rest of our community to task and put people's, make people actually engage in the work and stop relying back on saying, well, Heschel did X, Y, and Z, back in the day, but today there's no reflection of or impact of it. So that's what I would say would be the two sides to that.
Nate, you bring up a really good point about pushing people out of their comfort zone and getting people to join on that journey. It's really something that I'm passionate about and we're passionate about in Cleveland, is finding as many people as we can to come along on this journey. Because as Margaret and I were talking in preparation for this, there's so many people that you just that aren't at the same place. And so when you have the conversation, they're not ready for the conversation. And so what's our responsibility as Jews to our fellow Jews to bring them along on this journey? And that's what's, you hit it right on the head. We have to get a little provocative in doing that, to invite people along on that journey, because so much of it is education. And what are those educational sources that they're using to help get them an understanding of racial equity and inclusion? And are they using the news sources in our society, which we know aren't the best sources, or are they digging deep and really doing some soul searching and working with great partners in order to come along on that journey?
Thank you for that, David. So continuing with Cleveland, can you guys clarify just a little bit about the 21-day challenge? We have a lot of questions about how we can bring it to our own communities, and just maybe a little bit more detail of how it works. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Sure, I would love to. And I want to begin by saying I think my equity animal is a tortoise, a turtle, slow and steady, but the ability to be protective and make it through. So thank you, April. And is it Mahatna? I want to make sure that I'm addressing you, Rory. Mahatma Rory, is that correct?
Maharat, but Rory is also
Maharat.
Yeah.
It is, and so I say that because we have to be comfortable making mistakes. And I think that Nate pointed that out in this work, that it is so important. I want to address you, give you your spiritual title, because it sounds so beautiful and I love that and all the honor that comes with it. But I needed to step in and sort of like reveal myself that I didn't have that right. So thank you. And I'm delighted to share with you that we want to be able to share the 21-day challenge, the 2021 challenge with the Federation, so that you can bring it to your own communities. Each week has a big theme. For the Federation challenge that we did in Cleveland, the first week was on whiteness. The second week was on intersectionality. The third week was on Black Lives Matter. And the fourth week was on anti-racism. We do survey at the beginning and at the end, and of those that took the challenge in Cleveland, 70% said that they grew, they learned something, or that their mind was actually changed in a certain area. So there is real behavioral change. Every week, you are able to dig into a challenge or understand what a challenge might be, and then be able to identify, how you want to act on that at the end of the week. So this is so amazing to hear everything that is happening in the Federation community. It's really beautiful. And I would just say that, faith is so important to this work. It really is in Genesis, when God says, we are made in his image. We don't need the Genome Project, which was delivered in the 1990s. We know that God said it. And so we've got to work towards this on a regular basis in order to make what God said, his word, a reality in our hearts for all people.
Thank you so much for that. I know we're going to ask one more question. And for me, obviously, when we discuss, where in terms of racial diversity, in terms of racial justice, are we focusing just on, when we say people of color, can you define that a little bit more for people? As a mom of a son that's from South Korea, like we're talking about more than just, I know currently what we're talking about, but can you define that a little bit more in terms of your work? what are we encompassing when we talk about racial diversity and inclusion?
I think so much of the current conversation is about anti-Blackness, but it is really important that from there, and we are looking at hundreds and hundreds of years of history as it relates to anti-Blackness. We tend to think of 1619 as a marker in 400 years since the commercial end of slavery. And certainly slavery did a lot to the minds and the hearts in the United States to really sort of define a people. But it is so important, one of the pieces, looking at social justice, looking at diversity, looking at inclusion, and using whiteness as a marker. The more you begin to move away from whiteness, that is where oppression and anti lives. And so anything that is different from whatever the standard is, and typically we can all recognize the standard, and we begin to get into danger zones where we start othering other people, anybody who is different from us. I think April had a wonderful slide, as did Nate, really sort of looking at physical disabilities, physical and mental health, as well as sort of that racial spectrum. There's so many when we get into the isms and carry that as a whole. And it's so important to be able to understand that and recognize that, we are all at risk. And certainly we know that, the rise of anti-Semitism over the years, we're all at risk. Hate does not sort of just land in sort of one zone or one skin tone and, leave the othering alone. We know that, hate is fluid. It is highly adaptive. It is able to really, focus in. So it's so important. But that the anti-Blackness is really important, not to miss that. But it is certainly not the only piece of the puzzle.
I often encourage folks in Jewish space to begin to practice thinking of Jews as a multiracial people. Begin to not just think of it as there are Jews of color, but begin to conceptualize whatever identity you have as a member of a global multiracial people. And if you begin to integrate that, so this is both very practical in some ways and more theoretical in some ways. As you begin to integrate that concept, what does that begin to mean for you in terms of who should be around the table? If you are a leader of a multiracial Jewish community in X city, right? And some of this may be difficult. You might live in a city like San Francisco or New York where the data is very clear, and you may be in a place where the demographic data may not be clear, or it may appear that the nets need to be spread wider to capture all of the Jewish diversity that may be existent within that community. But I think that that's a helpful exercise and frame to begin to incorporate. I really encourage people who may identify, for lack of a better phrase, people may resonate with this or not, as white Ashkenazi Jews, that I invite you to take the time to learn more about that experience. Again, as I said, part of what happens in the context of race and racism is we focus on the other exclusively, and we need to focus on anti-Black racism. That actually is incredibly valuable, that specific piece. And for white Ashkenazi Jews, there's a whole complex piece. Rabbi Isaiah had a great conversation with Eric Goldstein. His book, The Price of Whiteness, is one of my favorite resources. So you can see the recording of that. It's available online. And his book, or the phenomenal recording, can give you a sense. I find that Jews at times, and I'm going to stop in a moment, have a hard time engaging with this because anti-Semitism is complex, and so is racism. And the more you can give yourself time, which is why I created, which is not actually why I said this, why I created Whiteness Chevruta, is to help white Ashkenazi Jews do that deep dive. You may be then better able to sit around a table and have a conversation about anti-Black racism or racism when it's grounded in your own family's placement in the broader racial justice conversation.
Thank you. And thank you so much, everybody. So the quote that I want to leave you with before Rabbi starts singing to us is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." Martin Luther King. Rabbi Isaiah, take it away.
Walk with you, and sing your spirit. Oh, happy GA! We're so glad you joined us today or tonight. Much love, friends. We'll see you soon. 5781, a year of courage and love. Thank you for joining us today. Till next time.
Great job, everyone. Yasher Koach, Rabbi Isaiah. That was gorgeous. Thank you.
Yes, Yasher Koach.
Great job, everyone.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.